This conference will now be recorded.
Thanks for coming to today's SONiC community meeting. Today's topic is debug framework led by Borkham. Yeah, let me give the time to Alio to drive the conversation. Alio, you should be able to present your screen now.
There we go.
So can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so can we get started?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so debug framework is a topic for today, and the real reason for additional framework coming into SONiC is that when developers want to debug the problems, right now we have the show text support and few show commands. In addition to that, right, usually we wanted much more than what we usually write into the DB, because writing into the DB is a bit of overhead. It comes with a little overhead, and we don't want to save everything into the database. So what we dump from the database when we run into an issue, trying to debug issues, leaves us with limited scope. For that reason, and usually the developers want every bit of information of what was the state of the system. So they prefer to write their own dump routines, which can give more insight into the state of the system at that particular moment, or internal data structure information, or some flags or whatnot. So each component is different, so there's no generic way saying that, hey, dump this piece of information for each component. So there is a need for framework which will channel in the triggers. Here is the trigger, whatever you need to dump, components, go ahead, dump now. So for that reason, we are calling this a framework. So what it really does is it provides a thin library when linked with, and the components can really register with the framework, and then sit there and wait for the triggers. And when there is a trigger to dump, the components will dump all the internal information. So that part is the dump routine, number one. And number two that this framework can do is sort of listen on the errors or assert for that matter, and then trigger these dumps and collect all this information. So asserts usually trigger an abort. So there is no real way to capture more information when asset condition is hit, except knowing that yes, an asset condition has been hit and it turned out to be false. So the condition has not been met, so I'm asserting and rebooting. So we want some level of configurability in that aspect as well, to know that when an assert condition turns out to be false, you want to do things differently. So some configuration aspect there to do to inform what to do when an assert is hit. So it can be different for production versus debug environments. or it should be configurable so you can administrator can determine what he actually wants to do. If he is repeatedly hitting a condition, he might want to do things differently. So a config option there might be a better idea. So those are two things primarily that for this for now we have considered that there are two main things that are needed in SONiC. So as I said, the first one is dump routine. So allowing components to register, write their own dump routines, register the dump routine, and when there is a trigger, invoke those functions. So,
Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt you. Seems
sure.
like there is a quite loud background noise from your side.
Is it from my side?
Yeah.
I'm still okay. I
This
was
is
trying to
better.
use.
Just everybody who's not speaking, please mute.
Yeah. Okay, can you go ahead? Seems like better now.
Okay, sure. So as the document goes on, it describes that scope, so which is primarily those two things. And as we go along, we wanted to enhance the ShowTech support utility itself, and also bring in some policy in terms of, because ShowTech support has bloated and become large, bring in some policy with respect to how many instances can we run, how much to keep, so the rotate and filtering part of it is the other aspect that we wanted to bring in and do it as part of the improving the debug ability. Okay, any questions so far before we get into the details? Okay, so while implementing this framework, we also wanted to, you know, have a pilot component implementation to show how this can be really used. So that's the other part of the scope in the context of it. So, um, I wanted to do it a bit differently. So I just wanted to give a quick overview and then jump to the flow so that it gives, we can skip a lot of text on the document here. So as I mentioned in the introduction, each component here will be linking with a thin library. We were thinking it calling it to be debug fm or debug framework.library, or it can actually go with the SWSS common because it's very lightweight. So it can be done both ways. So as of now, it's a small thin library that the components will link, and for the coordination part of it, either the notification or the pub/sub mechanism. So notification probably makes more sense, but again, it's the main point being that the triggers are the triggers that come from the northbound, like administrative commands or the asset utilities or any error handling functions, will send the trigger down, and using the utilities, they send a notification via Redis to all the components to do the job. And the debug information can be collected and shared on the screen or written into files which can be compressed and uploaded, or compressed and saved on the system. So essentially, that is all there is to this. And how it is done is, so when the component actually, let's go to the flow diagram here. So when the daemon or a component actually registers with the framework, I'll get to the detail. There are two options you can do it. What I describe now is option one. So when you register with the framework, what it does is it creates a thread and waits on the event from the Redis notification, really. So, and it subscribes. So this is one API call registering with a framework, and this accepts a function pointer or dump routine as an argument. So it can be a wrapper function, which in turn can call other functions, but to register with the framework, there is only entry point or the entry function that is registered with the framework. So once you register, you create a thread and wait on the notification. And as you see in the step 7, when the registered callbacks can get called. So within the API of registering with the framework, it creates a thread. It also subscribes to the DB, waiting for the notification. So from the external step number 4, when you get a trigger, uh, you kind of from the within the library of the trigger, you get a notification, and the notification is passed on to the thread as you have subscribed in step number 3. So the dump happens, and when you post that you are done, the subsequent actions like upload or compressing, or those can be taken care. So this is the very high level summary of all the activities that happen on the system using these library.
So the invoke trigger is writing into the Redis DB, right? The step
So
4.
yeah, invoke trigger itself is a utility that as of now it's weirdly thinking it's a Python utility kind of thing. It essentially is nothing but it sends a notification. So the utility itself can be developed like several filter options. Do you want the dump to be written into the syslog or written into a file? Or do you want the trigger to be sent to a particular component, or you want it to be for all the components? So the trigger API or the utility is the one who is capturing all that, and based on that sending a particular notification or notification to all kind of a thing. And
But
then it also,
the question is the invoke trigger is writes into Redis DB, which is being listened by all components threads, right?
right,
Because
it is
the 4 is
it is
going
a
all the way. Go ahead.
right, it is a notification producer, yes.
And that
So I
writes into okay.
Yeah, the only reason I put the framework library here is,
Uh-huh.
utilities also link with the library, that small library.
Oh, okay,
And
okay,
yeah,
got it now. Okay, that
so
is okay, got it, got it,
yes.
got it. And then this trigger is custom 1:1 with the function I register, or how that works? Maybe I will
So
wait for it. Maybe we'll wait for the use case scenario, then I will understand, I think.
right. I
Yeah.
mean, really here, the API is actually saying the library to say what sort of trigger is this? Is this a trigger for all, or is it for a particular component? Then the library, based on that, is either sending multiple events, or it can query the DB, checking for the number of registered components, and it can notify all the components, or it can check if the trigger is for a component, and if it is not even a registered component, then do nothing. So the library is taking care of all that logic.
Okay, so how the event is identified? Is there any GUID or something for the events?
So the events is either an administrative CLI command.
No, no, no,
So
no, no. Finally, when the event goes into Redis DB, which the components are listening, under the
right.
hood, when a component, how does it identify the events of interest to it? So finally the event is identified by a GUID, or how is it, like some kind of identity, right? So it knows, the daemon knows this is the event
Right.
I'm really waiting for.
Right. So step number 3 is where that particular component, uh, it opens the channel and waits on the. So then step number 3 is a
Oh, okay.
subscription to the event.
Oh, okay.
So
So it
on
is the
6,
identity. So the identity is by the key of the Redis database.
right.
Okay, got it. And do you have any schema for how to come up with the key so that there is no collision, or as we add more and more in future?
Right. As of now, it is the key will be the component name. So whether it is for all, it will be the independent publish events. So
Sorry, can you repeat?
based on the key. So
Sorry, can
essentially,
you
we're
repeat
not
your answer?
writing much into the.
Your voice just broke up. I don't know if it's just for me or for everyone.
Yeah, for everyone.
Okay. Number 5, publish event need not be a single event there. It could be multiple, one or many kind of a thing. If the depending on the trigger, if the trigger happens to be for all component, so it will reach out for it will read the Redis DB to check how many components have been registered, and for each component it will send out a notification. So it's one-to-one kind of a thing. So 3
Oh,
and
okay.
6 are one-to-one.
Okay. So what?
5
How is?
is, yeah,
Yeah. How is this trigger to event mapping? Like, what's the definition? How you define the trigger so the library knows
mhm.
what components are to be triggered for? Like, how does a trigger
Right,
or that trigger carries
yeah,
the information itself?
right. So right now the key is the component name itself. When I
Ah, okay.
register,
Uh-huh.
all I say is, hey, I'm a component identified by my component name, and I'm registering for this triggers.
Okay. Got it.
So key should suffice for now. And in
Okay.
the trigger, yes, trigger can carry more information, some of which might be very component specific. So it can be, so those are very opaque to the library. It will pass on those field value tuples as it received in the notification. So the
So,
notification allows.
so
Sorry, go ahead.
where will the framework be running inside every Docker or just a host environment?
So since it's a library, it will be running alongside the daemon. So it does not, the framework itself does not have an executing context. So if a daemon links with this library and invokes the framework, that's when the step number 2, the thread comes into play, and it kinds of uh, keeps waiting on the notifications, and then when it receives the notifications, dumps. Otherwise, it's sitting there idle. The framework utility, on the other hand, is also same thing as it might be a Python utility. So it's also short-lived. It just does the job, and it wakes up at 4, is done at 9 or 10 for that matter.
So the library will be in Python or in C++, or it doesn't matter.
Right, C++ is what we have in mind. We developed. So framework utility is Python. So Python extension. So the same calls can be extended using a Python extension and just using Swig, and yeah, you can make the calls. So if it
Okay.
is assert, yeah, if it is assert kind of trigger, they will directly be using the C++ API. If it is other utility, Python utilities, they will be using the Python API, which internally is nothing but a wrapper on top of the Swig API.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question about the flow. I can see that when the daemon is starting the registration, then you will get the trigger using an API. But does it work also when the daemon is restarted? Like not like when you do system like container restart or just yeah, mostly container restart. So will it get the indication of what was before?
Since we are talking about notifications, yeah. So it's a notification framework that we plan to use. So if you have not read the notification intended to you, I think you should be able to read those. Yes.
So it didn't get it. What I need to do every time?
No, we don't have to do anything. The daemon, right? I think in the process of its initialization, will have this API to register with the framework. So it is not an external trigger, right? Every time it restarts or every time it comes up, is going to invoke that API as part of its initialization. So that happens automatically. When the daemon exits, the thread created in number 2 also exits. So the next time around, yeah, you still create and you kind of you know reads from the, or you subscribe to the notifications.
And the invoke trigger using the API will be called only if a user will ask for the show tech support.
So show tech support could be one, but we plan to give on-demand trigger like show CLI. Let's say I'm trying to debug a component X. So as I said, the CLI command or the trigger can be specific to that particular component. So let's say I use a CLI like show debug component X. So it will then trigger to that specific component to dump at that particular instance. And a moment later, I want to see has the state changed, so I can trigger again. So it is on demand. There can be CLI on demand. Similarly, show tech support is another source of the trigger, and typically show tech support will probably ask to dump from all the components.
Yeah, the only thing I can see is when suppose some triggers were registered for a component, and then while executing or even before the component gets to it or whatever, if it crashes and it comes back and
Yeah,
it registers newly again, you may have to
yeah.
flush all the old requests so that it doesn't get disturbed by the old request, which doesn't make any more sense for the new instance of the daemon.
Right. So
I
there's
mean, the
one
API that.
thing. Right. So one thing is when it, yeah. So it will be a new subscription, right? I think
Yeah.
so you will open a new socket, so there's nothing to read from there. So it probably will not have anything else to process there.
No, the thing is, you register everything by component name, key name, right? Like if component X comes and registers as X, and then there are some notifications sent for the by the framework utilities, and that writes into readers for XXX, which is supposed to come back to the thread of XXX. But if the XXX dies right at that moment before it receives the event, then the XXX, will it stay in the readers DB, or how that works, or is it like transient thing? Will
So
there be a
since it's notification, I think there is a time associated with it. It can expire, I believe. But otherwise, also, I think there's no harm. I think it's just processing extra event
I know. The
is
thing is,
what I.
it might, yeah, what I'm thinking is it might turn out a little confusing if the daemon immediately starts and gets the trigger. I do not know. I'm just thinking ahead, like an event
My
that came from the old life should not
yeah,
disturb the new life of the daemon. I mean, as long as that
my
is taken care of, it should be
right.
fine. Yeah.
I'm thinking it inherently will be taken care from my understanding, because when you register, you're opening a new socket, and there's nothing being written into that socket as part of notification publish. So notification, yeah. So you're just notification consumer, and then there's no new notification. So I'm not
So the
100% sure, but yeah.
yeah,
So
that
I
we
believe
may
that
have
is
to
how it
verify.
was.
No, the thing is,
Yeah.
the notifications all being component name based, just make sure that the notification sent for the old, because it's the same name, right? Even though it's a different socket, the
Right.
old registrations shouldn't creep in to the new instance.
I
I
do.
do not know the subscribe notification mechanism of Redis well enough to
Right.
say either way.
I, Yeah, I think the notification, because we choose notification, I think this should be taken care implicitly,
Okay,
but I'll double check and verify that part. Yes, I will
okay,
do that.
thanks. Yeah.
I have another question. Let's assume that the idea of the framework is that once you ask for the information, then you will get it, right? So it means that all the information is available before even asking the trigger. Is that my assumption? Is that correct?
Right. So the idea is what you dump inside the component is framework cannot possibly know about it. So what gets dumped is what is written in the registered function. framework will only ensure to invoke that function. What gets dumped there, whether it is the complete tree structure you are dumping, you're dumping each node of a tree, you're parsing a linked list and dumping the only selected fields. It's not something that a framework cares about. The component owner will get to decide what to dump at that snapshot. So upon receiving
But
trigger, what is the current information held by the component is what probably will get dumped.
so once there is a trigger of the to publish, what is the publish
Mhm.
event? Is it that what you said is
Oh,
the daemon is making all the decision and what to dump, and when there is a trigger for the frameworks to the library, then the library
mhm.
gathers all the information and send it to the framework.
No, I think I should have probably improved this uh, picture. So the framework library here, I put one. The framework utilities also link with the this library. The daemons also link to this. So if I had an option to describe this better, the framework library on the third block, right? If I shift it next to framework utilities, between framework utilities and Redis DB, and then the 4 will end in the library that is linked with the framework utilities, and he will be sending it to DB. So the way you need to read this diagram is 4 is nothing but the framework utilities making an API call which does number 5.
But you're saying publish event. What I
Right.
have in mind is that the daemon creates some kind of information database. I don't know what type of information or what type of you want to provide
Right.
to the framework. So that's what I'm asking. What the daemon should hold? A text file, a binary file, what format
No,
of information of events? That's why I'm not understanding how you are using the framework.
I think let me give a try and see if I get it right, and you can correct me. That way, I can know if I understand right. So what I understand from what his explanation is the daemons. This is the debug framework. So the daemons write a function that is and that function decides what it is dumping, and the function is like a C function with a lot of parameters, right? Like we need to call that, and so this function registers with the framework, and then using utilities, you basically pass all the data the function may need, and that using the framework library gets into the Redis DB, and which goes back through the framework library through the subscription mechanism back to the function. So now the function gets all the data that is provided by the user through the framework utilities, and then this function dumps whatever it wants to as part of that trigger.
So it means that I gave it as a text information
I
that
mean,
it
the
can be
function
no
can do
the
anything.
data. No, the data that I
right.
provide within the function is a text that you can
Yeah,
dump.
it's daemon can decide if there's a lot of information that you want to dump as binary, export it and run across a utility which can interpret that binary information. Great, yes, you go ahead with the binary. But it's something a short information saying that no, my component is not ready kind of thing. Text is great.
Yeah,
So it
basically what
actually
you
depends on what you want to dump. Yeah.
Yeah, basically what you want to what you would like to expose when you write the daemon, right? And when it is running, I want to know what the heck it is doing right at this point, at this thing, and whatever it would be like. As a developer of the daemon, I would be interested in what this daemon at this point doing. So I send a trigger, and if it can dump that to me, and in a way that I understand, which is all proprietary, it's up to us.
Yeah.
But I
It's for
don't
the
think that
consumption.
it's like it maybe I understood it not correct, but it's not that you can that you always run the debug the new CLI that will uh, run at the background new registration and print them. It's a snapshot, right?
You're right.
Uh,
It's a snap.
It's not what you.
That's
I don't
right.
think
That's right.
Renuka
A
that you're saying. It's
snapshot.
a snapshot. It's not like the daemon will send you events when he wants. The daemon is requested to provide what he has already dumped, and then the utility will just print it to the screen as a snapshot, not like something that is done in the background, like let's do it always. Or maybe I'm
Right.
expressing
Yep.
myself
Yeah,
not
it's just a
correctly, but
snapshot. What we do is that, yeah, what we have is that we have this SWSys debug print, which will print it into a file. So you have the ability to print it into a file, which can be relayed back and then displayed in the console if required. So right now it's a snapshot. Whenever the trigger happens, the daemon processes the trigger and it decides either to save that content into a file, which you can look into in varlog debug.log. With the CLI triggers, we are relaying that information back to the CLI trigger and displaying the contents of the file.
so it's the daemon responsibility to decide what he wants to dump and how he wants to feed the framework. So the framework only displays the information that he provides, whether it's binary, whether it's text, and it is the user responsibility to understand what that data means.
Right.
That's right.
It's for the
Yes.
component. It's for the absorption of component owner. Component owner understands what is being done.
Yeah, in fact, I can even create a pipe and start keep live dumping into something. Basically, pretty much you do anything inside
Right.
the daemon.
So what continuous dumping of information is more like tracing, right?
Yeah.
It's not dump routines. It's not.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just
So
thinking,
it's
for
more of a,
example, for example, I can turn on a debug of one specific component which starts spewing things at a debug level or something like that. And then I send another trigger, say, hey, stop doing it, I'm done with it, or something like that. Basically, just to
yes.
a way of reaching the daemon.
Another question. We are expecting the daemon to dump. We are expecting the daemon to dump whatever he wants once he registers to the firmware, right? So it means on the init, it continues register that even if the framework utility did not trigger the API to read it.
So if I understand the question here, you're registering with the framework doesn't entitle the function or the callback function to be called. Only upon trigger it gets called, the registered function. If the daemon wants to call the function anyway without even for the trigger, there is no real reason to register with the framework. It can be done as part of their init routines. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks.
Do you have a real use case example we could go through?
So Lavin, you want to take that question? So we have this FDB arc and neighbor arc already trying to use this, right? So do you want to take that question?
Yeah, what was the question?
So I want to say a real use case example utilizing this framework that will help us understand.
So what we have is that, yeah, there are two use cases. One is the CLI triggers from Click Framework, wherein where you want to look into the contents which are there in the router rock module. Say, for example, we know that AppDB contains what was the route that was programmed from kernel into the FMCD. And we know OCP contains the information that is passed on to SI. But in between, the orchestration agent has some more internal data structures. So I want to know certain data structures inside the orchestration agent, which can provide some insights. Say, for example, given route, what is the SI object ID? So those informations can be retrieved using this framework from a CLI trigger, wherein I can dump the complete route table for VRF, or I can specifically ask for prefix information and then dump that specific route entry. Or I can dump next hop group info for what are the available next hop ECMP groups that are there in the router route module.
So this is meant for production network, right? Sorry, go ahead. You finish this question.
Yeah, so I think what
That's
Lavin
right.
just explained is, yeah, this, sorry, I should have corrected.
Yeah,
So
this
this
is from some
file
of the sample
OIDs
outputs
and
that
all
we
that,
got.
yeah. So this kind of information right now is not available in the Redis DB. So it's specific information that is dumped on the on demand on the trigger.
So the
I,
component is even so it's local database that you want to share for debug, which is great. But the component is any object like code base, because naorg is one thing, only one thing, like between all the org agents. So it's not like it's not like for the container. It's like any component that you decide to be there.
That's right. Any component
That's right. These are some of the examples.
right.
so in this example,
Yeah, right.
when the neighbor arc is the one registering for this trigger and giving this data out, right? So it gives the
Right.
data. In this case, how the data came out? Because it nicely gets spewed out by the command line. Because it comes back all the way to the
Yeah,
framework entity.
The daemon created a text file or text information.
So
that's right. The daemon uses a framework to save the contents into a log file, and the CLI just reads from the log file and displays it.
oh, okay.
But then when you integrate that in the show text support, are you taking, okay, just a moment. The framework always save in a file and then the utility reads from the file, or there are options?
It's an option. So in case of show text support, it is only saved to a file, and then the file is copied to the var log, where it can be zipped and then uploaded. Whereas when you use a click framework, wherein you create a new CLI, that is when we had an option to get the contents from the file and then display it in the console.
Okay, so if we are dealing with the show text support and we will have more and more such debugs, then we need to take into consideration two things. One of them is the size of the show text supports, because if everyone will create a log file, then and it might be even very, very big, then we end with a big text support which takes long time to create and long time to upload. So that's also something problematic. And another case is that we just added to the text support the options for the how old information that we want to store in that. So you need to take also files that were updated only after, only in the range of the time that we set for the show text supports, right? And then we
is right.
also should take, okay, should take also take into consideration the time it takes for the show text support to be created.
Yes, that's right. Right now, I think the show debug dump all will wait for the contents to be updated to the file, and then only it will continue with the rest of the show text support process. It depends on the individual components. If they really want to provide more details on all their internal data structures, it will take time. So we have to take a call. Each and individual component owners have to take a call on what really they wanted to have in the text support output. But it will be one trigger from show text support, wherein.
But you said that it's the same framework, or this is an option not to include that in the show text support.
So
right now it is included, meaning the.
Right. So we can handle this in two ways. So the trigger can allow options like, do you want to dump short or long? So based on receiving that particular optional parameter, components can decide to dump in a short form or in the long form. If it is for all, we probably should send short, like in show text support. Maybe we can invoke the trigger with short form, or we can add this additional thing like this is something that we plan to do. Add additional script to enforce the policies on what you just mentioned on the size or on the time kind of a thing. So what you said is understood, and I think it makes full sense.
So this is for production. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just that cool.
Okay, this is for production network, right? Production level command line, right? So I'm kind of okay. The few questions I have. One is the command goes all the way, and then the daemon finally dumps into a file, and then this CLI takes it from the file and show it, right? And how does it even know when did the component finish writing into the file? How does the sync works?
The event 8 here on the diagram.
Oh, okay. So the daemon has to finally call using the framework. Okay, the thread tells the action is done. Okay, good. Okay, one thing. And second thing is, okay, now the text is written. Today I write in my current version, I write in one format, right? And my next version, I realize, hey, I want to do it for this command. I wanted to add more information. So I add little more information. So then if I'm going to write a tool outside to analyze the show tech output or show debug output, and this tool is going to break when things change, right? When the data format changes, right? So I'm wondering, like, how do we, I mean, in few, is there any guidelines or something so that across the versions, the SPU remains the same for a command?
No, here what we are talking is what is the information needed by the component owner is what gets dumped.
I know, I
So let's
understand
say,
totally your,
right.
yeah, I understand your point altogether, but,
No,
you
but
know, go ahead.
yeah, so the tool is a good example, but so here it is for debug purposes. So the tool has to be enhanced to match what is being dumped. Right? I
Yeah,
mean,
the thing,
when the tool was developed in the first place, would have taken certain information as a baseline to develop that tool. So if there is an additional information, that additional changes in the tool has to be made.
that's the
If it
thing,
is
because,
text, yes. If it
yeah,
is
because,
text, yes, it is for the interpretation of the component owner. So he's looking at the information. But if it
okay.
is a tool, yeah, tool has to be enhanced.
Now
It's
going,
again the callback is given to the component owner, right? So the component owner
I
can decide
understand.
the format
Yeah,
in which
yeah,
they want to write.
yeah, I get
Currently,
the
we
point.
do not have any guidelines,
Yeah, I get the
but if
point,
you
but
want, you can write it into JSON format.
yeah, I get the point, but that what I'm thinking is going ahead, right? Like as we evolve more and more, like I mean, the component owners are not going to be there anymore, right? Here, I write one, the guy who moves on, the next guy comes, and then the guy who finally debugging this component is someone unrelated to this. I mean, who might have not touched these daemons at all, right? And then he looks at the show tech support, and then I write a tool to analyze this thing, and then based on the debug output, I try to make something, and suddenly I run on different version. Oops, it breaks. My tool breaks. I cannot work anymore because I'm, you know, the practical problems going ahead, because this is evolving. I think going ahead, this might evolve into more than just the debug only.
Right. So one point there is we are trying to come up with a framework as opposed to a structure. So here we are giving you an option to dump as much information or as little information as you can. The interpretation of the information is something which is not in the scope of the framework.
I get it.
Um, Right. So we
I get
cannot
it.
govern what, yeah, I can't even govern what format, or it can be binary as we already discussed, or text or anything else. So I can't even enforce that. So I think, in short, I think it's outside the scope of the framework.
Got it. Thanks.
Renuka, if you want, you can print the version information also into the buffer so that the tool which analyzes it can interpret it appropriately.
Yeah, I think the framework library to the minimum can put that information. I mean, it can enforce that the daemon register its version, and so it can add to the somehow to the command line output that this debug output is coming from arcagent daemon of running this version in some parsable format. That would be helpful. Some
That's a good.
amount of things which the framework can enforce.
That's a good suggestion. We'll definitely see what we can do. There is a way, I think we are requesting the component owners to wrap all the multiple prints with a begin and end. So I think what you suggest can go into the begin routine. So when the component invokes this begin, it can capture that kind of information. So it can be considered. So we'll see what we can do about that. Yeah, it is extensible.
So
Thank you.
Anil, on follow-up question, so anyway, we have all this vital information, right? Why can't we convert it as a JSON, as a single format, so that every tool can understand and they can read it properly?
So what information are you actually referring? Because if it is about the dump information, that is something that is unstructured.
Yeah, so in the dump information, anyway, you are keeping some vital information saying that which module or which routine is dumping this data. So that maybe in the tools, they can easily filter it out based on the key value pair. Or maybe you have a blob of data that could be anyway sitting in the hierarchical structure over there, at least in the high level information. If you are able to give in a nice key value pair, that could be any tool can be read and it could export to any other dashboards.
Yeah, basically the metadata you agreed to collect through the framework, dump it in a form, readable, parsable.
Right. So if I relay back to step one, the registration API is only taking two arguments: the component name and the function name. We only have actually so far discussed about option one. There is also an option two, which doesn't even take the debug function name. So why did we even come up with option two is, let's say when you are trying to dump some information, the information to try to read that information might require you to take some logs, right? In that case, you'll be stepping on the toes. And you don't want to compromise the functioning of the component because you want to dump something, right? So that's where option two comes into play. So here, when you are trying to link with the framework, all you are doing is you don't even give a debug function. All you are giving is, hey, I'm registering with the framework to be able to receive the triggers. So when the trigger, when the event, the notification event is published, the thread which actually handles the release DB activities or will do the subscription, will wake up and handles completely on itself. So that additional thread in step two event doesn't come into play. So it directly reaches the daemon. So if I go back to the picture here, number one is registration with the framework. It only gives a component name. So here the step two is not there. The library just says, okay, this particular component is registered. So it notifies DB saying that here is a list of the registered component. So when number four happens, I know just to send an event. So 6 actually lands up directly on the daemon. It does not land on the library created thread. So in that case, if someone is using option 2, then the framework doesn't have any information other than just the component name. Also, the JSON format or the key value tuples is something that framework cannot derive or arrive at. It's completely the information that is held by the daemon, which it choose or the component owner choose to dump. So if he's trying to dump it in JSON format, great. As I said, framework does not enforce any format. So
But
if component owner
The
Yeah.
registration in either case can say along with the component name. In either case, it can say it's running version, right?
Right. So version
Yeah.
wise, I think,
I
as I
mean, those
said,
few.
it can be taken.
Yeah, the few thing which are static, right, can be okay. One of
Mhm.
that I can think of is version name. So if there is
So it
any
is.
other, yeah, go ahead.
So is it a version name of the release, or is a version name of the component
The
specifically?
version of
Let's
the
say it's.
component, specifically the version of the component.
So when you receive the trigger, when you are dumping a whole lot of information, why can't the version be the first piece of
I mean,
information that
yeah,
you
that
dump?
yeah, prefer not to put that in the components functionality, right? Because there's no way to enforce that, right? So, but if the framework says whenever you register, you also give me your version, and I mean, version is just one example, maybe one or two more things which the component knows. Then the framework can always put that JSON along with create that as a JSON, like Madhu said, and share it along with the output action file. And in this case, it could be spewed into the in the show dbg, the command example you showed. Before
Mhm.
the displaying the text file, you can say the component name and the version, followed by the spew from, and this component name and version can be formatted in the same way across the board, all components, and the actual spew from the component itself will follow, which will be however the component wrote.
Um,
I mean,
I see the merit in what you are suggesting, but several of the components, the version itself, it will have to be a static text again. So,
yeah,
every time it has to change. It's not something that can be fetched dynamically. It's a static piece of information.
so it
So
should be,
enforcing it across all the components, um, yeah. So
I mean,
I don't know if
every component to the
version
minimum has
making.
every component to the
Yeah.
minimum has few things like its name, its release number, and I do not know what more I can think of. At least these two things every component does have, and it's static.
Well, I think I'm not trying to argue here or anything. I definitely see merit in what you're suggesting, but with a particular release code, I think the versions of the libraries and versions of the components are fixed and static, aren't they? We are talking
Uh,
about production code.
No,
We are
I am
talking about a
talking about,
production.
okay, I'm talking about, yeah, that is true. You are right. But at the same time, I am talking about collecting in a production. I have a lot of switches running, right? And I am collecting output from few switches which are running in trouble, and I'm analyzing outside externally using my tool. Okay,
Mommy.
so when I'm running this tool externally, I only see the data collected. So if the data collected also has the name and the version, then my tool can customize the analysis based on that. Okay, this is version 3.0 of ArcAgent, then I know the show blah 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 is going to be in this format. And whereas if it is 4.0, I know there is one more extra field added, so my tool has to parse differently.
Yeah.
Because
So we'll go back. We'll go back and see how whether enforcing is one thing, but is it easy? Are all the components will they be adhering to that? Is what we see. We are trying to create less work in trying to integrate with the framework. So here, if you see here in the option two, all we are saying is hey, call this API and you are done with.
okay,
The
yeah,
component will take care of things.
I totally get your point. It's
So
just a suggestion. However, if you guys can't fit, yeah,
yes, we will go back and look at it.
yeah, yeah,
Naveen and I will discuss this tomorrow and see what we can do about that.
yeah. It just a request.
But yeah, I see the merit in your suggestion, definitely, yes. So we'll go back and think about it.
Okay, we
All
are.
right, so I have presented it in different, but the rest of the text is more or less what we have discussed. So I don't think there is a real need in going section by section. So I think this, the introduction, the summary, everything, I think we have covered most of it.
So some
So
of what you're showing is already available in the code in the GitHub as a PR.
no, we are still working on that, but most of it we are wrapping up on things. They are not being pushed into the community yet. So we wanted to see if this makes sense. Then we'll try to wrap this up and then send it to the review.
Okay. Thank you.
Ben, you want to add anything to that?
No.
No, that's fine, Abel. Yeah.
I do want to call out that for the contributors or owner of features, when you have the pull request ready, please send the notification to the community. Also CC me so that we can connect you with the reviewers to review the reviewers for these features to do the diligent code review for the pull request. If you just publish it, nobody will notice that. Please send
Sure.
out
No.
thanks like
So, Jin, that's the SONiC mailing list.
yes.
Okay.
And CC. Yeah, thanks. Okay. With that, thanks to Anil. You have any questions or comments? Please put on the PR. We will take it from there.
Please.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Anil.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Naveen.
Sure, Ben.
Thanks, Anil.
Bye-bye.
تسجيل الكول